The chapel bell had rung 3 times. Wade Mercer knew because he'd counted each one, standing there like a fool in his best suit, the one he'd bought special in Denver, the one that still smelled faintly of camphor and new wool. His collar strangled him. The late afternoon sun slanted through the western windows, catching dust motes that hung in the air like tiny witnesses to his humiliation. Behind him, the pews creaked. Someone coughed. Another person shifted their weight, boots scraping against the floorboards that Wade himself had helped install 2 summers back when the town decided Silverado Creek needed a proper church. Reverend Matthews stood to his left, Bible open, face carefully neutral in that way people's faces get when they're trying real hard not to show what they're thinking. "Son," the Reverend said quietly, "maybe we should—" "She's coming!" Wade's voice came out rougher than he intended. "Train might have been delayed." But they both knew the train had arrived on time. Wade had watched it himself that morning, black smoke rising against the mountains, whistle screaming as it pulled into the station. He'd been there. He'd waited. Rebecca hadn't been on it. Another creak from the pews. Wade's jaw tightened. He could feel them back there. The Hendersons, the Macaulays, Tom Bradford, and his wife Sarah, old Dutch Peterson, who'd come all the way from his claim up in the high country. They'd all come to see Wade Mercer finally settle down, finally bring some softness into that hard life he'd carved out of rock and dust. Instead, they were watching him crack open. "Wade!" His brother's voice low and urgent. Cole had moved up beside him without Wade noticing, hand hovering near Wade's elbow like he thought Wade might bolt or collapse. "This ain't— You don't have to stand here. I'm fine. You ain't fine. Nobody's fine standing at an altar alone." Wade's hands were fists at his sides. He forced them open, finger by finger. The chapel felt too small suddenly, too hot, too full of eyes and breathing and waiting. Rebecca's flowers still sat at the altar, white roses she'd insisted on, special ordered from as far as San Francisco. Cost him half a month's profit. She'd been real specific about those flowers. "Give her another few minutes," Wade said. Cole made a sound somewhere between frustration and pity. "Wade, she ain't— I said give her a few minutes." The silence that followed hurt worse than noise would have. Wade kept his eyes on that doorway, on the rectangle of light where Rebecca was supposed to appear, where she'd promised to appear. They'd planned this for months, every detail, every piece of it. She'd helped him rebuild the ranch house, picked out curtains for windows, talked about chickens and maybe a milk cow and how many children they'd have. 4, she'd said. She wanted 4. Behind him, someone stood up. Then another person. The pews groaned as people began to move, quiet and awkward, filing out like mourners at a funeral. Wade heard their whispers, tried not to hear them, heard them anyway. "Poor man. I never trusted her. Easterner. Should have known. Wade Mercer's too hard for a woman like that anyway. Too cold. That last one cut deeper than it should have. Wade's spine went rigid. Too cold. Maybe. Maybe that's exactly what he was, and Rebecca had finally figured it out. Maybe she'd looked at their future, at him, and realized she was signing on to a life of frost and stone. Reverend Matthews closed his Bible with a soft thump that sounded like a door shutting. "Son, I'm real sorry." Wade nodded once. Words wouldn't come. His throat had closed up tight, stuffed with pride and rage and something worse, something that felt like grief but sharper, meaner, mixed up with shame. Cole's hand finally landed on his shoulder. "Come on, brother. Let's get out of here." "In a minute." "Wade, I said in a minute." Cole squeezed once, then let go. Wade heard his boots retreating, heard the chapel door open and close. The building emptied until it was just Wade and the Reverend and those expensive white roses that were already starting to wilt in the heat. "She leave any kind of message?" Wade's voice sounded hollow, unfamiliar. Reverend Matthews hesitated. "Mrs. Carson at the boarding house said Rebecca left before dawn. Took everything with her. There was a note on the bureau." "What did it say?" Another hesitation. "Just that she was sorry. That she couldn't go through with it." Wade absorbed that. Couldn't go through with it. Not couldn't marry him. Couldn't go through with it. Like he was some kind of ordeal to be endured. Like their whole future together was a trial she'd decided to escape. Right? He turned slowly, deliberately, taking in the empty pews, the flowers, the light streaming through windows that made everything look soft and golden and false. Guess that's that then. Wade, don't let this— Thank you for your time, Reverend. Wade's voice came out flat, controlled. He was good at controlled. Years of breaking horses and surviving winters and burying his father alone had taught him controlled. I'll cover any costs for the use of the chapel. That ain't necessary. I'll cover it. He walked down the aisle without looking back, boots loud against the floorboards, each step echoing in the empty space. Outside, the sun hit him like a slap. The whole town seemed to be holding its breath, doors closed, windows vacant, the street unnaturally still for a Saturday afternoon. They were all inside, Wade figured, hiding, talking about him. Poor Wade Mercer, left at the altar. Must have done something to drive her off. Must have been too cold, too hard, too much himself. Cole waited by their horses, hat pulled low. Don't, Wade said before his brother could speak. Wasn't going to say nothing. Good. They rode back to the ranch in silence, the mountains rising dark against the eastern sky, shadows stretching long across the valley floor. The land looked the same as it had that morning, sage and scrub, rocky soil, tough grass that barely held on through the dry months. Wade had carved this place out of nothing, turned it into something profitable through sheer stubborn will and work that would have killed a weaker man. And for what? So he could stand alone in a church, while a woman who'd promised him everything disappeared like smoke? The ranch house came into view as they crested the last rise. Rebecca had painted the shutters blue. She'd insisted on blue, said it would make the place look less harsh. Wade stared at those blue shutters and felt something crack inside his chest. You want me to stay? Cole asked as they dismounted. No. Wade, I want to be alone. Cole studied him for a long moment, worry carved into the lines around his eyes. You sure that's smart? I don't care if it's smart. I want to be alone. His brother nodded slowly, reluctantly. I'll come by tomorrow, check on the herd. Fine. Wade watched Cole ride off, then turned to face his house. His empty, blue-shuttered house that Rebecca had filled with plans and promises and lies. He walked inside. The place still smelled like her perfume, like the lavender sachets she'd hung in the closets. Her touch was everywhere. In the arranged furniture, the curtains, the rug she'd brought from back east. He stood in the middle of his own home and felt like a stranger. The rage came then, sudden and complete. Wade grabbed the nearest chair and threw it across the room. It hit the wall with a satisfying crash, one leg splintering, then the dishes, then the curtains, those damned curtains she'd spent hours hemming. He tore them down, ripped them apart, threw them in a heap on the floor. When the fury burned itself out, he stood breathing hard in the wreckage, knuckles bleeding from where he'd punched the wall without meaning to. The house looked like it had been ransacked, like something violent had torn through it. Good, Wade thought. That's exactly right. He cleaned up mechanically, working in silence as the light faded, swept the broken dishes, dragged the ruined furniture outside, pulled down the rest of Rebecca's touches until the house looked the way it had before she'd arrived, bare, functional, empty. Better this way. Better to have nothing than to have something and lose it. By the time he finished, full dark had fallen. Wade sat on his porch steps, staring out at land he could barely see, listening to night sounds, coyotes in the distance, wind through the sage, his horses moving in the corral. He'd survived worse than this. His mother dying when he was 12, his father's slow descent into bitterness and drink. Winters that killed livestock and nearly killed him too. Drought years, flash floods, a land that gave nothing easy and took everything it could. One woman running out on him? That was nothing. That was just another hard thing in a life full of hard things. Wade told himself that until he almost believed it. The weeks that followed blurred together in a haze of work. Wade rose before dawn and worked until dark, then worked some more by lamplight, fixing fence, breaking new ground, training horses, anything to keep his hands busy and his mind blank. Cole came by regular, pretending to check on the ranch, but really checking on Wade. Dutch Peterson brought a bottle of whiskey and sat with him one night without saying much. Tom Bradford's wife, Sarah, left a covered dish on his porch with a note that just said, "You ain't alone." But Wade was alone. That was the whole point now. He stopped going to town except when absolutely necessary. When he did go, he felt the eyes on him, Pitying or curious or judging, he couldn't tell which and didn't care. People tried to talk to him, offer sympathy or advice or whatever they thought a jilted man needed. Wade nodded politely and left as quick as he could. The ranch became his whole world, just him and the land and the animals that depended on him. Simple, clean, nothing complicated about feeding livestock or mending fence or breaking a horse. Do the work, survive another day, repeat. Rebecca's name stopped coming up in conversation. People moved on to other gossip. Life in Silverado Creek continued like nothing had happened, because for everyone else, nothing really had. Just another failed courtship, another broken promise. The frontier was full of them. Wade told himself he'd moved on too. Then one morning in late September, Cole showed up earlier than usual, expression tense. "You hear about the mail-order agency opening up in Denver?" Cole asked without preamble. Wade looked up from the horse he was grooming. "No. Lot of ranchers using it. Matthews, Carson, even Old Dutch. Good for them." Cole leaned against the corral fence, studying Wade with that careful look that meant he was about to say something Wade wouldn't like. "You ever think about—" "No." "You didn't let me finish." "Don't need to." Answer's still no. "Wait, you can't run this place alone forever. You need help. You need—" "I don't need anything." Wade's voice came out harder than he intended. "I'm doing fine." "You ain't fine. You're barely holding together. This ranch is too much for one man, and you know it." "I've managed so far." "Managing ain't the same as living." Cole pushed off the fence, frustrated. "Look, I ain't saying you gotta marry for love. I'm saying there's practical arrangements, business deals, women who need security, men who need help. No feelings involved, just mutual benefit." Wade's hand stilled on the brush. A business deal, no feelings involved. The idea settled into his mind like a stone dropping into still water. No risk, no vulnerability, just an arrangement, clean, simple, honest about what it was. "These women know what they're signing up for?" Wade asked. "They know exactly. That's the whole point. No false promises. Just a contract both parties agree to." Wade worked in silence for a moment, thinking. The ranch did need help. He could admit that much. The house was falling apart because he had no time to maintain it. Meals were whatever he could throw together quick. Laundry piled up until he had nothing clean to wear. He was exhausted all the time, running on stubbornness and coffee. And there was something else, something he barely let himself acknowledge. The loneliness. The silence of the house at night. The absence of another human voice, another presence. Not love, he was done with that poison, but simple companionship. Someone to share the burden. "How's it work?" Wade heard himself ask. Cole brightened slightly. "You write to the agency, tell them what you're offering and what you need. They match you with suitable candidates. You correspond a bit, make sure you're compatible. Then if you both agree, she comes out and you marry." Just like that. Just like that. Legal and binding, but based on practical terms instead of romantic nonsense. Romantic nonsense. That described Rebecca perfectly. All her talk of love and forever, and where had it gotten him? Standing alone in a church, that's where. "I'll think about it," Wade said. Cole nodded, trying not to look too pleased. "That's all I'm asking." But thinking about it turned into actually considering it, which turned into Wade riding into Denver 3 weeks later, sitting in a stuffy office while a prim woman named Mrs. Lawson explained the process. "We require complete honesty from both parties," she said, spectacles perched on her nose as she reviewed his information. "What exactly are you offering, Mr. Mercer?" "Working ranch, 60 acres, good water, small house. I need help running it. Cooking, cleaning, basic ranch work if she's able. In return, she gets security, her own home, my name, and protection." Mrs. Lawson wrote this down in precise handwriting. "And what are you not offering?" Wade met her eyes steadily. "Romance, courtship, love. This is business, ma'am. I want that clear from the start." She didn't even blink. "Many of our applicants prefer exactly that arrangement, Mr. Mercer. Women who need security and independence more than affection. I believe I have someone who might suit." She pulled a file from her desk drawer. Clara Whitmore, 26 years old, from Boston originally, educated, practical, lost her family 2 years ago and has been working as a seamstress since. She's looking for a fresh start and has specifically requested a business arrangement rather than a traditional courtship. Wade took the photograph she offered. A woman looked back at him, Not beautiful in the conventional sense, but striking. Sharp eyes, strong features, expression that suggested she didn't suffer fools. She looked like someone who could handle hard things. She knows ranch life? Wade asked. She's willing to learn, and Mr. Mercer, she's very clear in her letter that she has no interest in emotional entanglement. She wants security and purpose. Nothing more. Perfect, Wade thought. Absolutely perfect. I'll write to her, he said. Each. The correspondence that followed was brief and efficient. Clara's letters were well written but businesslike, laying out her skills and expectations without flourish. Wade appreciated that. No poetry, no romantic declarations, just facts. I can cook and manage a household. I learn quickly and am not afraid of hard work. I expect honesty and fair treatment. I will provide the same in return. Wade's responses matched her tone. Ranch life is difficult. Winters are harsh. The work never ends. I need a partner, not a dependent. If you can handle that, I can offer you a stable home and my respect. After 6 letters over 2 months, they agreed to terms. Clara would come to Silverado Creek. They would marry immediately. The arrangement would be clearly defined, a partnership for survival, nothing more. No love, no vulnerability, no risk of another betrayal. Cole helped Wade clean up the ranch house before Clara's arrival. They repaired the damage from Wade's rage, painted over scars, made the place presentable, if not welcoming. You sure about this? Cole asked the night before Clara was due to arrive. I'm sure. She might want more eventually. Feelings have a way of... There won't be feelings. Wade's voice was flat, certain. We both know what this is. That's the whole point. Cole looked like he wanted to argue, but didn't. All right, brother. Your life. The next day, Wade stood on the train platform, watching passengers disembark. He spotted Clara immediately. She looked exactly like her photograph, traveling suit neat and practical, single trunk being unloaded by the porter. She saw him too, walked over without hesitation. Mr. Mercer? Miss Whitmore. They shook hands. Her grip was firm, direct. Up close, Wade could see that her eyes were gray, assessing him with the same practical evaluation he was giving her. The Reverend is waiting, Wade said. We can marry today if you're agreeable. I am. No hesitation, no second thoughts, just agreement. Wade felt something in his chest ease slightly. This was right. This would work. They married that afternoon in the same chapel where Wade had stood alone months before. But this time, the pews were empty except for Cole and the Reverend. No audience, no spectacle, just a simple exchange of vows that were really a contract, witnessed and legal. I do, Clara said clearly when asked if she took Wade as her husband. I do, Wade echoed when his turn came. And that was that. Married, partners, bound together by law and mutual need rather than emotion. Wade took her back to the ranch as the sun lowered toward the western peaks. Clara sat beside him in the wagon, silent, taking in the land with those sharp gray eyes. He wondered what she saw, the harshness of it, the beauty, or just the practical reality of what she'd signed on for. It's not much, Wade said as the house came into view. It's more than I had, Clara replied. I'll make it work. That night, Wade showed her to her room, the spare bedroom he'd cleaned and furnished with basics. She stood in the doorway, trunk at her feet, and looked at him directly. I want to be clear about expectations, she said. You want help running this ranch. I want security and a place that's mine. We both benefit. But I'm not looking for affection or intimacy. That wasn't part of our agreement. Relief flooded through Wade. Agreed. Separate rooms, separate lives except where the work overlaps. Clara nodded, satisfied. Then we understand each other. We do. He left her to settle in, retreating to his own room where he lay awake longer than usual, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of another person in his house. It was strange having someone else here after months alone. But it was a practical strangeness, not an emotional one. This would work, Wade told himself. This was safer, better. As long as they both kept their hearts locked tight, as long as they honored the terms of their arrangement, nothing could go wrong. He didn't let himself think about how easily promises could break, how quickly safety could shatter, how fire had a way of burning through even the most careful defenses. That lesson was still coming. The first morning, Clara was already in the kitchen when Wade came downstairs. Coffee sat hot on the stove, Bacon sizzled in the pan, and she moved around the space like she'd been doing it for years instead of hours. She didn't look up when he entered, just gestured toward the table. "Sit. It's ready." Wade sat. The food appeared in front of him. Bacon, eggs, biscuits that actually looked edible. He ate in silence while Clara took her own plate to the counter, standing there with her back to him. The arrangement was clear. They weren't going to play at being a couple, pretending at domestic harmony they didn't feel. "I'll need a tour of the property," Clara said when he'd finished. "Can't help with work I don't understand." "After breakfast." She nodded, collected his plate without asking, washed it efficiently. Wade watched her move, noting the economy of her gestures, the lack of wasted motion. Rebecca used to flutter around the kitchen, making simple tasks take twice as long, chattering constantly. Clara worked like someone who'd spent years doing for herself, no energy for performance. They walked the property as morning light spread across the valley. Wade pointed out the water source, the fence lines that needed constant repair, the pastures where he rotated the livestock. Clara asked practical questions: how many head of cattle, what the soil was like, where supplies came from, how often predators caused trouble. "You'll need to learn to shoot," Wade said as they examined a fence post torn up by something large. "Wolves come down from the high country when winter starts, sometimes worse than wolves." "I can shoot." Clara crouched beside the damaged post, running her fingers along the claw marks. "My father taught me before he died. Haven't done it in a while, but I remember." "Good. I'll set up targets this week." They continued the tour in silence, Clara absorbing information, Wade providing it without embellishment. When they returned to the house, she went straight to examining the vegetable garden Rebecca had planted and then abandoned. Most of it had died, choked by weeds or scorched by the late summer sun. "This is salvageable," Clara said, more to herself than Wade. "Late in the season, but I can get winter crops in, turnips, cabbage, maybe carrots if I'm quick." "Do what you want with it." She glanced at him, expression unreadable. "This is my home now too, Mr. Mercer. I intend to make it function properly." "Wade," he said, "if we're married, you should use my name." "Wade, then." "And I'm Clara." It felt formal, this exchange of names after vows had already been spoken, but formal suited them. Distance suited them. Wade nodded and left her to the garden, heading out to work the horses that needed training. The days developed a rhythm. Wade woke early, found coffee and breakfast waiting. He worked the ranch while Clara tackled the house and garden, transforming chaos into order with the same ruthless efficiency she applied to everything. They ate dinner together, the only meal they shared, in near silence, then retreated to separate corners of the house until bed. At night, Wade lay in his room and listened to Clara move around in hers. The walls were thin enough that he could hear her routines, the splash of water in the basin, the creak of floorboards, the rustle of sheets. It was strange having someone so close, yet so separate, like living with a ghost, except ghosts didn't cook breakfast or mend his shirts or reorganize the entire root cellar in one afternoon. After 2 weeks, Cole came by unannounced and found Clara repairing the porch railing Wade had been meaning to fix for months. "Well," Cole said, dismounting with a grin, "ain't this domestic?" Clara looked up, hammer in hand, expression neutral. "You must be Cole. And you must be the woman who's got my brother actually maintaining his property." Cole tipped his hat. "Pleasure to meet you, Clara." "Likewise." Wade emerged from the barn, wiping grease off his hands. "Didn't expect you today. Just checking in, seeing how married life's treating you." Cole's eyes danced with amusement Wade didn't appreciate. "It's fine." "Just fine? That all you got to say?" Clara stood, setting the hammer aside. "I'll get coffee started. Give you two privacy." She disappeared inside before Wade could protest. Cole waited until the door closed, then turned to Wade with raised eyebrows. "She's efficient," Cole observed. "That's what I needed." "Uh-huh. And how's it working? The arrangement?" Wade's jaw tightened. "Like we agreed. She runs the house. I run the ranch. We stay out of each other's way." "Sounds lonely." "Sounds practical." Cole studied him with that knowing look that made Wade want to punch something. "You know, brother, there's a difference between protecting yourself and building a prison." "I'm not having this conversation." "Wade!" I said, "I'm not having it." Wade turned back toward the barn. "Stay for coffee if you want. Otherwise, I've got work." He heard Cole sigh behind him. but didn't turn around. Inside the barn, Wade threw himself into mucking stalls with more force than necessary, trying to work off the irritation crawling under his skin. He hadn't built a prison. He'd built something safe, something that couldn't hurt him. There was a difference. When he came in for dinner that night, Clara had set out Cole's usual spot at the table, even though his brother had left hours ago. "He didn't stay," Wade said. "I know, but he might next time, and I wanted to know where things go." Clara brought the food to the table, stew that smelled better than anything Wade had managed for himself in months. "Your brother cares about you." "I know that." "Does he think this arrangement is a mistake?" Wade looked at her sharply. Clara met his gaze without flinching, spoon halfway to her mouth, genuinely curious rather than confrontational. "He thinks I'm hiding," Wade said finally. "Are you?" The blunt question hung between them. Wade considered lying, then remembered their agreement. Honesty. That was part of the deal. "Maybe. Does it matter?" Clara chewed thoughtfully, swallowed. "Not to me. I'm hiding too in a way. That's why I'm here. Running from a life that didn't work anymore, looking for something simpler. We're both using this arrangement as shelter. Nothing wrong with that, as long as we're honest about it." Something in Wade's chest loosened slightly. "You ever regret it, coming out here?" "Not yet." "You?" "Not yet." They finished dinner in companionable silence. It wasn't warmth exactly, but it wasn't cold either. Just two people sharing space, sharing honesty, keeping their distance while acknowledging the reality of what they'd built. The weeks turned into a month, then two. Clara's presence reshaped the ranch in ways Wade hadn't anticipated. The house stopped feeling like a place he just slept and started feeling like something that worked. Meals appeared regularly. Clothes got mended. The garden produced actual vegetables that supplemented their stores. Small repairs happened without Wade noticing until they were done. And Clara herself proved tougher than he'd expected. When one of the horses spooked and threw him, not badly, just enough to bruise his ribs and his pride, she appeared with bandages and whiskey without being asked. "You need to wrap those," she said, nodding at his ribs. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're hurt. Don't be stupid about it." Wade bristled at the tone, but she was already moving, hands competent as she wound the bandage tight around his torso. Her touch was impersonal, clinical, but the proximity was jarring. He couldn't remember the last time someone had tended to him like this. "You know what you're doing," he said through gritted teeth as she pulled the bandage tight. "I told you I'm practical. That includes basic medical care." Clara tied off the bandage with a firm knot. "You're going to be sore for a week. Don't do anything stupid, like working my own ranch, like pretending you're not hurt and making it worse." She stepped back, wiping her hands on her apron. "I need you functional, Wade. Breaking yourself out of pride doesn't help either of us." He wanted to argue, but she was right. That was the thing about Clara. She was usually right, in that irritating way practical people often were. "I'll be careful," he muttered. "See that you are." That night, Wade found a bottle of liniment outside his door with a note in Clara's precise handwriting. "Use this. Don't be stubborn." He used it. October arrived with cold mornings and the first threats of frost. Wade spent long days moving the herd to lower pastures, reinforcing shelters, preparing for winter's inevitable assault. Clara worked beside him more often now, learning to handle the stock, proving she could rope and ride better than he'd expected. "You said you were from Boston," Wade said one afternoon as they mended fence together. "How'd you learn ranch work?" "I didn't. I'm learning now." Clara hammered a staple into the post with 3 efficient strikes. "But I grew up watching my father work. He was a carpenter. Taught me that most jobs are just paying attention and not being afraid of getting your hands dirty." "What happened to him?" Clara's hands stilled for just a moment. "Accident at a construction site, scaffolding collapse, killed him and 2 other men. My mother died 6 months later. Just gave up, I think." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It was 2 years ago. I've moved past it." But her voice carried an edge that suggested she hadn't, not completely. "That's when I decided Boston wasn't for me anymore. Too many memories. Too many people who looked at me with pity." Wade understood that. The pity was worse than the grief sometimes. They worked in silence for a while, the only sounds the hammer strikes and wind through the grass. Then Clara spoke again, quieter. "Why'd you really do this? The mail order marriage? Wade considered deflecting, but their deal was honesty. The ranch was too much alone, and I wanted to make sure I never... He trailed off. Never what? Never felt what I felt standing in that church. Never gave anyone that kind of power again. Clara nodded slowly, like that made perfect sense to her. The woman who left you at the altar. You loved her? Thought I did. And now? Now I know better. Wade pulled another staple from his pouch. Love's just a pretty word for vulnerability. I'm done being vulnerable. Good, Clara said simply. So am I. They finished the fence line as the sun dropped low, painting the mountains in shades of copper and shadow. Walking back to the house, Wade realized he felt something he hadn't felt in months. Comfortable. Not happy, exactly, but settled. Like he'd finally found solid ground after months of stumbling. Clara had become part of the landscape, as essential and unobtrusive as the mountains themselves. She existed in his space without invading it, helped without hovering, spoke without demanding response. It was exactly what he'd asked for. So why did it sometimes feel insufficient? Wade pushed that thought away. Insufficient was dangerous thinking. Wanting more than the arrangement allowed was how people got hurt. He'd learned that lesson. He wouldn't forget it. November brought the first real snow, light dustings that melted by afternoon but promised worse to come. Wade spent his days checking stock, ensuring shelters were sound, laying in supplies. Clara worked on preserving the garden's final harvest, filling the root cellar with enough food to last until spring. They'd developed a pattern of working parallel to each other, close enough to help if needed, distant enough to maintain their careful boundaries. It functioned. That was enough. Then one morning, Wade came downstairs to find Clara standing at the stove, swaying slightly. You all right? Fine. But her voice was wrong, tight with pain. Wade moved closer, saw how pale she was, how her hands gripped the counter. Clara, I said I'm fine, just a headache. You look like you're about to pass out. I'm not. Her knees buckled. Wade caught her before she hit the floor, surprised by how light she was, how fragile she felt in his arms. Clara's eyes fluttered, struggling to focus. Dizzy, she mumbled. Sorry, don't know what... When's the last time you ate? She blinked at him, confused. Clara, when did you last eat? Yesterday, maybe... I've been busy. Wade swore under his breath. He carried her to the sofa, laid her down despite her weak protests, then returned to the kitchen. Bread, butter, the eggs she'd prepared for him. He brought it all over on a plate. Eat, he ordered. Wade, you're not fine, and you're going to eat. We had a deal, Clara. You help me, I help you. That includes making sure you don't work yourself unconscious. She stared at him for a moment, then took the plate with shaking hands. Wade watched her eat, noting how hollow her cheeks had gotten, how the dress she'd altered to fit when she arrived now hung loose. She'd been feeding him well, but apparently not herself. This stops, Wade said when she'd finished. You don't skip meals. You don't work until you collapse. I don't care how much needs doing. I don't care. You're no use to me sick. The words came out harsher than he meant, but he couldn't seem to soften them. We're partners in this. That means you take care of yourself same as you take care of the work. Clara's eyes flashed with something, anger maybe, or hurt. I didn't realize you cared so much about my well-being. I care about this arrangement working. Can't work if you're dead. It was the wrong thing to say. Wade knew it as soon as the words left his mouth, saw Clara's expression shutter closed like a door slamming. Right, she said quietly. The arrangement. I'll be more careful about maintaining my usefulness. She stood, still unsteady but determined, and walked past him toward the stairs. Wade watched her go, wanting to call her back, to explain that wasn't what he meant. But what would he say? That he actually did care about her well-being beyond just practical concerns? That seeing her collapse had sent a spike of fear through him that felt dangerously close to actual worry? That would violate their agreement. That would be feelings, and feelings weren't part of the deal. So he let her go, and spent the rest of the day working furiously, trying to outrun the uncomfortable truth that their careful arrangement was developing cracks he didn't know how to seal. That evening, Clara came down for dinner pale but composed. They ate in heavy silence, neither acknowledging the morning's incident. But Wade noticed she cleaned her plate, and he noticed himself noticing, and the whole thing felt more complicated than it should have. After dinner, as Clara cleared the table, she spoke without looking at him. "Thank you. For this morning." Wade grunted acknowledgement, not trusting himself to say more. "I mean it. I was being careless. You were right to call me on it." "Clara, we have an arrangement," she continued, her voice steady and impersonal. "I intend to uphold my end. That means staying healthy and capable. I apologize for the lapse." She was giving him an out, Wade realized, a way to step back from whatever uncomfortable moment they'd stumbled into, to return to the safe distance of their agreement. He should take it. That was the smart thing. "Just don't do it again," he said instead. "I'm not good at—" He gestured vaguely, unable to finish the sentence. Clara almost smiled. "At caring for people? I noticed." "I didn't say I cared." "No, you didn't." But something in her expression suggested she'd heard what he hadn't said anyway. The moment stretched between them, fragile and uncertain. Then Clara turned back to the dishes, and Wade retreated to check on the horses, and the careful distance reasserted itself like it always did. But that night, lying in his bed listening to Clara move around in the next room, Wade couldn't shake the memory of how light she'd felt when he caught her, how scared he'd been in that split second before he knew she was all right. It was just practical concern, he told himself. She was useful. He needed her functional. He almost believed it. December arrived with serious cold and snow that actually stuck. The ranch transformed into something stark and beautiful, everything outlined in white, the world reduced to essentials. Wade spent long hours ensuring the livestock survived, breaking ice on water troughs, distributing hay, checking for signs of illness or injury. Clara kept the house running like a machine, fire always going, food always ready, everything organized and efficient. They'd settled into a routine so familiar it felt like they'd been doing it for years instead of months. But there were moments, small, unexpected moments, when the arrangement felt less like business and more like something Wade didn't have a name for. Like when Clara appeared at the barn during a particularly brutal storm, wrapped in blankets, carrying hot coffee without being asked. "Thought you might need this," she said, breath-forming clouds in the frigid air. Wade took the cup, fingers numb with cold. "You didn't have to come out here." "I know." She stood there while he drank, not leaving, not talking, just present. The silence between them felt different than usual, not empty but full of something unspoken. When Wade handed back the cup, their fingers brushed, and he felt the warmth of her skin against his frozen hands. "Get back inside before you freeze," he said, rougher than necessary. Clara nodded and left without argument, but Wade found himself watching her navigate through the snow, making sure she made it safely to the house. That was practical, he told himself, making sure his partner stayed healthy. Nothing more. Or like the afternoon he came in from work to find Clara at the kitchen table, head in her hands, shoulders shaking. For a terrible moment, Wade thought she was sick again. Then he realized she was crying. He stood frozen in the doorway, completely out of his depth. He'd agreed to a business partnership, not emotional support. But Clara was crying, quietly and desperately trying to hide it, and Wade couldn't just leave her there. "What happened?" he asked, voice awkward. Clara's head snapped up, eyes red and wet. She wiped at them hastily, embarrassed. "Nothing, I'm fine." "You're crying." "It's nothing, just a letter from Boston. Someone I used to know got married. It's stupid. I don't even care, I just—" She trailed off, crumpling the letter in her fist. "I'm being foolish. Ignore me." But Wade didn't move. He thought about Rebecca, about the letters she'd probably written to friends back east, announcing her escape from the hard man in the harsh territory. He thought about Clara, who'd been brave enough to leave everything familiar and start over with a stranger. "It's not stupid," he heard himself say, "missing the life you left, wondering if you made the right choice." Clara looked at him, surprised. "Do you? Miss your old life?" "Sometimes. Then I remember why I changed it." She nodded slowly, understanding in her eyes. "I don't miss Boston, really. I miss who I was before everything went wrong, before I had to become this." She gestured at herself, at the practical woman in work clothes who could rope cattle and shoot wolves. "This seems pretty capable to me." Capable isn't the same as whole. The words hit Wade harder than they should have. He knew exactly what she meant. He was capable too, surviving, functioning, maintaining the arrangement, but whole? No. He'd deliberately broken off pieces of himself, deemed them too dangerous to keep. No, he agreed quietly. It's not. They sat in the kitchen as afternoon light faded, not talking, just existing in the same space with their separate griefs and regrets. It should have felt uncomfortable, this intimacy of shared brokenness. Instead, it felt like the most honest moment they'd had since Clara arrived. Eventually, Clara stood and started preparing dinner, movements mechanical but steady. Wade went to wash up, and when he returned, they ate in their usual silence. But something had shifted. Some wall had developed a crack that let through more light than was probably safe. Wade told himself to shore it up, to rebuild the distance. He didn't. Christmas came without ceremony. Clara made a better dinner than usual, and Wade brought in wood for a fire that wasn't strictly necessary. They sat in the parlor afterward, the first time they'd shared the space outside of practical necessity. My father used to read to us on Christmas, Clara said, staring into the flames. Dickens, usually. My mother would make apple cider, and we'd sit by the fire and pretend we were wealthy people with nothing to do but enjoy ourselves. Sounds nice. It was. Clara's voice carried that edge of old pain again. What about you? What were your Christmases like? Wade thought back to cold mornings and his father's increasingly bitter moods, to Christmases that had stopped being celebrations after his mother died. Quieter. My mother tried to make it special when she was alive. After, it was just another day. That's sad. That's life. Clara looked at him then, really looked at him, and Wade had the uncomfortable feeling she was seeing more than he wanted to show. You don't let yourself have anything soft, do you? Anything that isn't strictly necessary for survival. Soft gets you hurt. So does hard, just differently. Before Wade could respond, Clara stood and went to her room, returning with a package wrapped in brown paper. She held it out, almost shy. I made this. For Christmas. It's not much, just... Wade took the package, surprised. He unwrapped it carefully to find a shirt, beautifully made, better than anything he owned. The stitching was perfect, the fabric good quality, clearly chosen with care. Clara, you needed a new shirt. All yours are falling apart, and I had fabric left from altering my dresses, so it made sense to... She stopped, flustered. It's practical, not sentimental. But they both knew it was more than that. The care in the stitching, the time it must have taken, the fact that she'd been paying attention to what he needed. It was more than their arrangement required. Thank you, Wade said, meaning it. I don't have anything for you. I didn't expect anything. He should leave it there. Accept the gift, acknowledge her practicality, maintain the distance. Instead, Wade found himself speaking. My mother had a music box. Only nice thing she owned. When she died, my father put it away, and I never saw it again. After he passed, I found it in his things. I kept it, don't know why. It's upstairs, you should have it. Clara's eyes widened. Wade, I can't. You can. It's just sitting in a drawer. Better if someone uses it. He went upstairs before she could argue, retrieved the box from where it had lived untouched for years. When he came back down, Clara took it with trembling hands, opening it carefully. A simple melody played, slightly off-key from age. It's beautiful, she whispered. It's old, but it works. Clara closed the box, holding it against her chest like something precious. Thank you. I'll take good care of it. They stood there in the firelight, two broken people who'd agreed never to be vulnerable, exchanging gifts that meant more than either would admit. The moment stretched, fragile and dangerous. Then Clara stepped back, the distance reasserting itself. I should sleep. Morning comes early. Yeah. She went upstairs, still holding the music box. Wade stayed by the fire until it burned low, wondering what the hell they were doing, where this careful arrangement was drifting. He'd promised himself no feelings, no risk, no vulnerability. But sitting there in the dark, Wade had to admit the truth he'd been avoiding for weeks. He was starting to care about Clara Whitmore, not just as a business partner, not just as someone useful, as a person, as a woman. As someone whose happiness mattered to him in ways that had nothing to do with their arrangement, it terrified him. The winter deepened, and so did the cracks in their carefully constructed distance. They still maintained separate rooms, still spoke primarily about practical matters, still honored the terms of their agreement. But Wade found himself lingering over morning coffee, listening to Clara talk about her plans for the spring garden. Found himself asking about her day, her thoughts, her opinions on things that had nothing to do with the ranch. And Clara softened too, in small ways. She laughed at his dry observations about the neighbors. She touched his arm when making a point. She started sitting closer at dinner, the space between them shrinking incrementally. Neither acknowledged what was happening. To acknowledge it would be to admit the arrangement was failing, that they were breaking the rules they'd set. But Wade felt it growing anyway, this dangerous warmth, this connection that felt less like convenience and more like something that could actually hurt him if it went wrong. He should stop it. He should pull back, reinforce the walls, remember what happened the last time he let himself feel. He should. He didn't. January brought the coldest temperatures Wade had seen in years. The ranch became a battle for survival, keeping animals alive, preventing pipes from freezing, ensuring they had enough fuel and food to outlast the brutal weather. Through it all, Clara worked beside him without complaint. She learned to handle the worst of it, the blood and shit and exhaustion that came with keeping things alive and killing cold. She never flinched, never backed down, never became less than the partner he needed. And somewhere in those frozen weeks, Wade stopped thinking of her as his mail-order bride and started thinking of her as Clara. Just Clara. The woman who could rope a calf and quote Dickens, who could shoot straight and cry over letters from home, who had fled one life and built another from nothing but will and work. The woman he was falling for despite every promise he'd made himself. One night, after a particularly brutal day, they sat by the fire too exhausted to make it upstairs. Clara's head drooped against Wade's shoulder, and he let it stay there, let himself feel the weight of her, the warmth. "We're doing well," Clara murmured, half asleep. "The arrangement. It's working." "Yeah," Wade said, even though he knew they were both lying now. "It's working fine." But as Clara drifted off against him, Wade stared into the fire and admitted what he couldn't say aloud. The arrangement had failed weeks ago. They'd both just been too scared to admit it, and now, with winter still raging and Clara warm against his side, and his heart doing exactly what he'd sworn it wouldn't do, Wade had no idea how to protect himself from the disaster he could feel coming. He'd built walls. Clara had slipped through them anyway, and the worst part, the absolutely terrifying part, was that Wade wasn't sure he wanted those walls anymore. February thawed into March, and with the melt came something Wade hadn't expected: hope. The brutal winter had ended without major losses. The herd was intact, the ranch still standing, and Clara was still there, still working beside him as the land turned from white to muddy brown to the first tentative green. They'd stopped pretending somewhere in those frozen months. Not openly, not with words or acknowledgement, but in 100 small ways that added up to something neither could deny. Wade's hand on Clara's back as she climbed into the wagon, Clara's fingers lingering when she passed him his coffee. The way they sat closer now, spoke softer, looked longer. The walls were still there, but they'd become transparent. Wade could see through his own defenses to what was happening underneath, and it scared him worse than any winter storm. One evening in late March, Clara was mending by lamplight while Wade reviewed the ranch's accounts. The silence between them had become comfortable, almost intimate. Then Clara spoke without looking up from her stitching. "Wade, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why didn't you ever ask about my past? When I first arrived, you never questioned why I needed to leave Boston. Never pushed for details." Wade set down his pencil. "Didn't seem like my business. We had an arrangement. Your reasons for needing it were your own. Most men would have wanted to know." "I'm not most men." Clara smiled at that, small and genuine. "No, you're not." She set aside her mending, attention fully on him now. "But I want to tell you anyway, if you want to hear it." Wade did want to hear it, had wanted to for months, but hadn't let himself ask. "All right." Clara took a breath, gathering herself. "After my parents died, I was alone in Boston. 24 years old, no family, working as a seamstress, barely making enough to survive. There was a man, Thomas Garrett. He owned the shop where I worked. He was kind to me when I was grieving, and I mistook that kindness for something more." Wade felt his jaw tighten, but said nothing. "He courted me. Properly, or so I thought. Made promises about marriage, about taking care of me. I was naive enough to believe him." Clara's voice stayed steady, but her hands twisted in her lap. "Then I found out he already had a wife, a whole family in New York that he visited every month while telling me he was traveling for business. Son of a bitch. I confronted him. He laughed at me. Said I should be grateful for the attention, that women like me, orphans with nothing, should take what they could get and not ask for more. Clara's eyes met Wade's, fierce despite the old hurt. So I quit, left Boston, decided I'd rather have an honest arrangement with a stranger than pretty lies from a man I thought I knew. Wade felt fury rising in his chest, hot and immediate. Not at Clara. At the bastard who'd used her grief and loneliness like weapons. At a world that told women they should be grateful for crumbs. He was wrong, Wade said, voice rough. About you, about what you deserve. Was he? Clara's question was quiet but sharp. I came here for security, Wade, for a business deal. That's not so different from what Thomas wanted, using someone for what they could provide. It's completely different. We were honest. We both knew what we were agreeing to. He lied to you, manipulated you. And you've been completely honest with me? Clara interrupted, standing now, agitated. About what this has become? About why you can't look at me anymore without… She stopped herself, shook her head. Never mind. Forget I said anything. But Wade couldn't forget it. He stood too, the space between them suddenly charged with everything they'd been avoiding. Without what? He demanded. Say it, Clara. No. Why not? We agreed to honesty, didn't we? From the start. So be honest. Clara's eyes blazed. Fine. You want honesty? I think we're both liars. We made this arrangement promising no feelings, no complications, but that's not what this is anymore. You know it and I know it, and we're both too scared to admit it because admitting it means what? Means we failed. The words burst out of her raw and frustrated. Means we couldn't even manage a simple business deal without making it complicated. Means I'm exactly as stupid as I was with Thomas, falling for a man who doesn't want… Wade closed the distance between them in 2 strides and kissed her. He didn't plan it, didn't think about it. Clara was standing there telling him she'd fallen for him, calling herself stupid for it, and every defense Wade had built crumbled into dust. His hands found her face, her hair, pulling her closer as she made a small surprised sound against his mouth. For one perfect second, Clara kissed him back. Her hands gripped his shirt, her body pressed against his, and Wade felt something in his chest break open, something that had been locked tight since Rebecca left him standing alone. Then Clara shoved him away, breathing hard, eyes wide. Don't, she said. Don't do that. Clara. No? She backed up another step, hands shaking. You don't get to do that. You don't get to kiss me because I'm upset and then go back to pretending we're just business partners. I won't be someone's convenient comfort. That's not what this is. Then what is it? Clara's voice cracked. Tell me, Wade. What exactly is this? Wade opened his mouth and found he couldn't answer, because answering meant admitting he'd broken his own rules, that he'd let himself care, that he was terrified of what came next. That's what I thought. Clara's laugh was bitter. We're both cowards. At least I can admit it. She walked out, not upstairs to her room, but outside into the cold March night. Wade stood frozen, heart hammering, tasting Clara on his lips and hating himself for not having an answer when she needed one. He could go after her, should go after her, but what would he say? That he was falling for her, that he wanted more than their arrangement allowed, that the thought of losing her scared him worse than anything had scared him since his father died? All of that was true. None of it felt safe to say. So Wade stayed inside like the coward Clara had called him, listening to her footsteps fade, doing nothing. Clara came back an hour later, eyes red, expression closed. She went straight to her room without looking at Wade. The door closed with a soft click that felt like a gunshot. Wade sat by the dying fire until dawn, replaying the kiss, replaying her words, replaying his own silence. He'd thought keeping his walls up would protect him. Instead, they just hurt the one person who'd managed to slip through. The next morning, they moved around each other like strangers. Clara made breakfast, Wade ate it, neither spoke. The easy rhythm they'd developed over months shattered into awkward silence and averted eyes. It went on for days. Polite distance. Careful avoidance. The house that had felt almost warm now felt cold again, empty despite 2 people living in it. Cole came by on the 4th day and immediately noticed something was wrong. What happened? He asked Wade while they worked on repairing a water trough. Nothing. Brother, I know you. This ain't nothing. Wade hammered a nail with more force than necessary. Clara and I had a disagreement. It's handled. Handled how? By not talking to each other? We talk. About the weather and what's for dinner, maybe, but you're dancing around each other like you're scared to get close. What'd you do? Why do you assume I did something? Cole gave him a look. Because I know you, and you're an idiot when it comes to people caring about you. So what happened? Wade set down the hammer, suddenly exhausted. She said the arrangement wasn't working anymore, that we'd both caught feelings and were lying about it. And she was right. So what's the problem? The problem is we agreed not to do this. Wade's frustration finally boiled over. We had rules, clear boundaries. This was supposed to be safe, simple. Now it's complicated and messy, and I can't what? Can't let yourself care about someone? Can't risk getting hurt again? Cole's voice was gentle but firm. Wade, you're going to lose her by protecting yourself. You see that, right? Better than losing her after I give her everything. You think there's a difference? You think it'll hurt less if you push her away now versus loving her and having it fall apart later? Either way, you lose. But one way, you at least got to have something real first. Wade stared at the half-repaired trough, Cole's words sinking in like water into dry ground. His brother was right. Wade had already lost the safety he'd tried to build. Clara was already under his skin, already mattered, already had the power to hurt him. The only question now was whether he'd be brave enough to admit it. That night, Wade knocked on Clara's door for the first time since she'd arrived. She opened it warily, still in her day clothes, face carefully neutral. Can we talk? Wade asked. Clara hesitated, then nodded. They went downstairs to the kitchen table, sitting across from each other like they were negotiating a new contract. I'm sorry, Wade said, for kissing you without asking, for not answering your question, for being a coward about all of this. Clara's expression softened slightly. I'm sorry, too, for pushing when you weren't ready. I am ready, or I'm trying to be. Wade forced himself to meet her eyes. You were right. About the arrangement failing, about us catching feelings. I have feelings for you, Clara. I've had them for a while. I just didn't want to admit it because you're scared. Terrified, Wade corrected. Last time I let myself feel like this, I got left standing in front of everyone I know, made a fool of, and I swore I'd never put myself in that position again. I'm not Rebecca. I know that. Up here. Wade tapped his head. But convincing the rest of me is harder. Clara reached across the table, stopping just short of touching his hand. So where does that leave us? I don't know. Wade struggled for words. I want more than the arrangement. I want you. Actually you, not just the partnership. But I don't know how to do that without risking everything. Everything's already at risk, Wade. You can't unfeel what you feel. Neither can I. Clara's voice was steady now, certain. So we can either keep pretending and make ourselves miserable, or we can try. Actually try. No more walls, no more rules about not caring. Just see what happens. And if it goes wrong, then it goes wrong. But at least we'll know we tried instead of living in this halfway place where we're both too scared to be honest. Wade looked at her hand, still hovering near his. He could pull back, could retreat to safety, to the cold certainty of walls and distance. Or he could reach forward into the terrifying unknown of actually letting himself feel. He reached forward. Their fingers laced together, and Wade felt the last of his defenses crack. Not shatter. He wasn't fixed, wasn't suddenly unafraid, but cracked enough to let light through, to let Clara in. Okay, he said quietly. We try. Clara smiled, real and warm and hopeful. We try. They sat there holding hands across the kitchen table, two damaged people agreeing to risk damage again, and for the first time in months, Wade felt like maybe, just maybe, he could survive whatever came next. The days that followed were different. Not easier exactly, but more honest. Wade and Clara stopped pretending they were just business partners and started figuring out what they actually were to each other. It was awkward sometimes. Wade didn't know how to court someone he was already married to. Clara didn't know how to accept affection after months of maintaining careful distance. They stumbled through it, learning each other in ways that had nothing to do with ranch work. Wade learned that Clara hummed while she cooked, that she read poetry when she thought no one was listening, that she was scared of thunder but would never admit it. Clara learned that Wade was gentler than he pretended, that he noticed small things, that he showed care through actions because words still came hard. They started eating breakfast together instead of Wade leaving early, started sitting closer in the evenings, started saying goodnight instead of just disappearing to separate rooms. And one night in early April, when the first real warmth finally arrived, Clara knocked on Wade's door. "Can I come in?" Wade opened the door, found her standing there in her nightgown, hair down around her shoulders, expression uncertain but determined. "I don't want to sleep alone anymore," she said simply. "That's all right with you." It was more than all right. Wade stepped aside, let her in, and when they lay down together, just lying there, wrapped in each other's warmth, it felt like coming home in a way Wade had never experienced. "Is this real?" Clara whispered in the darkness. "Are we real now?" Wade pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of her hair. "Yeah, we're real." He felt her smile against his chest. They fell asleep that way, tangled together, no more walls between them. For 3 weeks, life was better than Wade had thought possible. The ranch thrived in the spring warmth. Clara's garden exploded with growth. The cattle were healthy, the work manageable, and Wade went to bed every night with Clara beside him, woke up every morning to her still there. He started believing it might actually work, that he might actually get to keep this. Then one morning in late April, Wade woke to the smell of smoke. He was up and dressed before he was fully conscious, instinct taking over. Outside, the eastern sky glowed orange beneath a column of black smoke. The wind was blowing hard from the mountains, carrying the scent of burning pine and something worse, the massive consuming heat of a wildfire out of control. Clara appeared beside him, already dressed, face pale. "How far?" she asked. Wade calculated wind speed, distance, the dryness of the grass after weeks without rain. 5 miles, maybe less, and moving fast. "What do we do?" Every survival instinct Wade had said run. Get Clara on a horse, ride for town, let the ranch burn and count themselves lucky to escape with their lives. Fire like this didn't negotiate. It consumed everything in its path. But this was their home. Everything they'd built together, the repairs, the garden, the life they'd just barely started admitting they wanted. Wade looked at Clara and saw his own conflict reflected back. "We fight," he said. Clara nodded once, sharp and determined. "Tell me what to do." They moved like they'd been preparing for this their whole lives. Wade sent Clara to wet down the house and barn while he drove the cattle toward the creek. The smoke thickened as he worked, turning morning sunlight orange and surreal. Ash began falling like snow, dusting everything gray. By the time Wade got back to the house, the fire was visible on the ridge, a wall of flame advancing through the trees, consuming everything, roaring like a living thing. Clara had soaked the roof, the walls, created a perimeter of wet ground around the buildings. Her face was streaked with ash and sweat. "The garden?" she asked. "Let it go. Focus on structures." They worked without stopping as the fire bore down. Wade had never felt anything like the heat, the noise, the sheer violence of it. The wind screamed, carrying embers that started spot fires all around them. They beat them out one by one, desperate, exhausting work. Clara fought beside him without complaint, without fear showing, just grim determination. Wade kept expecting her to panic, to realize this was suicide and demand they run. But she stayed, matching his intensity, refusing to give up. "Wade!" Clara's shout cut through the roar. "The barn!" Wade spun to see flames crawling up the barn's western wall. The horses inside were screaming. He ran, not thinking, just moving. Got the door open, started leading the panicked animals out one by one. Smoke filled his lungs. Heat seared his skin, but he kept going back until they were all out. The last horse cleared just as the barn's roof caught. Wade stumbled back, coughing, and Clara was there, grabbing his arm, pulling him away from the collapsing structure. "It's gone," she said. "Let it go." They watched the barn burn, standing too close to the heat because they were too exhausted to move farther. Around them the fire raged, turning night into day, consuming their land with casual brutality. "The house," Wade managed through smoke-raw throat. They turned back to find the house still standing, still wet, flames flowing around it like water around a stone. The garden Clara had worked so hard on was burning. The fences were gone. Half the pasture was blackened earth. But the house stood. Wade and Clara fought through the night, beating out spot fires, re-wetting surfaces, collapsing with exhaustion only to drag themselves up and keep fighting. The fire roared around them for hours that felt like days, relentless and merciless. Then, sometime near dawn, the wind shifted. The flames turned, chasing easier fuel away from the ranch, moving south toward empty land. Wade and Clara stood in the gray light, covered in ash and burns and exhaustion, watching the fire retreat. "Is it over?" Clara asked, voice hoarse. "I think so." They surveyed the damage. The barn was gone, reduced to smoking timbers. The garden was ash, fences destroyed, equipment lost. But the house stood. The cattle had survived in the creek. The horses were safe, if scattered. They'd lost a lot, but they'd saved what mattered most. Wade turned to Clara and really looked at her for the first time since the fire started. She was filthy, exhausted, had burns on her hands and arms from beating out flames. Her hair was singed, her dress was ruined. She'd never looked more beautiful to him. "You could have run," Wade said. "Should have run. That was insane, staying to fight." "So was you going back into a burning barn for horses?" Clara's eyes met his, fierce and bright despite the exhaustion. "This is my home too, Wade. I wasn't going to let it burn without a fight." Something in Wade's chest cracked wide open. All the fear, all the control, all the careful distance he'd tried to maintain, it all burned away like the grass, leaving nothing but raw truth. He'd almost lost her. Not to betrayal or choice, but to fire and chance, and the brutal reality of a land that didn't care about their plans or fears. Standing there in the ash-covered dawn, Wade realized he'd been so focused on protecting himself from hypothetical future pain that he'd nearly wasted the present, nearly wasted her. "Clara," he started, then stopped, the words too big for his smoke-damaged voice. But Clara understood anyway. She always understood. She crossed the blackened ground between them and took his face in her burned hands. "I love you," she said simply. "I've loved you for months. I'm done pretending I don't." Wade had sworn after Rebecca that he'd never say those words again, that he'd never give anyone that kind of power over him, that love was just another word for weakness. He'd been wrong about everything. "I love you too," Wade said, and felt the last of his walls collapse completely. "I'm sorry it took almost losing you to admit it." "You're an idiot," Clara said, but she was smiling through tears that cut tracks through the ash on her face. "Yeah. And you're going to have to get used to me being here, because I'm not going anywhere. Not fire, not hardship, not your stubborn fear is going to make me leave. Promise?" "Promise." Wade kissed her there in the ruins of their ranch, tasting smoke and ash and tears, and something sweeter underneath, hope maybe, or just the pure relief of finally being honest about what mattered. When they pulled apart, the sun was rising properly, painting the scorched landscape in shades of pink and gold. It should have looked desolate. Instead, it looked like a beginning. "We should check the damage," Clara said, practical even now. "Figure out what we can salvage." In a minute, Wade pulled her close again, unwilling to let go just yet. "Let me have this first. Just you. Just this, before we face the rest." Clara softened against him, head on his chest, arms around his waist. They stood in the wreckage of their careful arrangement and the ashes of what they'd nearly lost, holding each other like the world was ending. But it wasn't ending. It was just starting. The fire had burned away the lies they'd told themselves, the walls they'd hidden behind, the fear that had kept them distant. What was left was raw and real, and more terrifying than any wildfire. But Wade wasn't running anymore, neither was Clara. Whatever came next, they'd face it together, actually together this time. They stood there until the sun climbed higher and reality reasserted itself with the harsh light of day. The ranch wasn't just damaged, it was devastated. Everywhere Wade looked, he saw loss. Blackened fence posts jutting from scorched earth, the barn reduced to a skeleton of charred beams, equipment melted into unrecognizable shapes. The garden Clara had nurtured was nothing but ash. "Come on," Clara said finally, pulling away but keeping her hand in his. "Let's see how bad it really is." They walked the property together, cataloging the destruction. The cattle had survived but were scattered and spooked. The horses were unharmed but would need new shelter before nightfall. The house had survived mostly intact, though the porch was damaged and several windows had cracked from the heat. Wade did rough calculations in his head and didn't like the numbers. Rebuilding the barn alone would cost more than they had saved. New fencing, new equipment, replacing lost feed, it added up to more than the ranch could afford, especially with half the grazing land burned to nothing. "We're in trouble," he said quietly. Clara surveyed the damage, face set in that determined expression Wade had come to recognize. "How much trouble? Enough that I might need to sell off half the herd just to rebuild. And even then—" He trailed off, doing the math again, hoping it would come out different. It didn't. "Even then what?" "Even then, we might not make it through next winter. Not without the barn, not with reduced stock. I'd need to take on debt, and if we have another hard season—" "We'll manage," Clara interrupted. "We always manage. This isn't the same as managing through a cold spell, Clara. This is—" Wade gestured at the destruction around them. "This is everything I built, gone. Years of work burned in one night." "Not everything." Clara squeezed his hand. "I'm still here. You're still here. The house is standing. That's not nothing." Wade wanted to believe her optimism, but exhaustion and loss were weighing on him like physical things. He'd fought so hard to make this place work, to build something solid and lasting. And in a few hours, it had nearly all disappeared. "Maybe we should—" He stopped himself, but Clara caught it. "Should what?" "Nothing. Forget it. Wade, we just promised honesty. Don't start hiding things now." Wade pulled his hand free, suddenly unable to stand still. "Maybe you should go back to Boston while you still can, before this place drags you down with it." The words came out harsher than he meant, but they were out now, hanging in the smoke-thick air between them. Clara stared at him like he'd slapped her. "What? You've got skills. You could find work in the city, make a decent living. You don't need to tie yourself to a failing ranch and a man who can't even protect what's his. Stop it. I'm serious, Clara. You signed on for a working ranch, not a disaster. I can't give you what I promised. Hell, I don't even know if I can keep the land at this point. You'd be smart to cut your losses and—" "I said stop it." Clara's voice cracked like a whip. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to finally tell me you love me and then try to push me away the second things get hard. I'm trying to be practical. You're trying to protect yourself." Clara stepped closer, angry now, color rising in her ash-streaked face. "You think if you push me away first, it won't hurt as much when I leave. That's what this is really about, isn't it? You're still scared I'll abandon you like Rebecca did." "That's not—" "It is. You're terrified that I'll wake up and realize you're not worth the trouble. So you're giving me an out before I can take one myself." "Well, I'm not taking it, Wade. I'm staying. You don't understand what you're signing up for. Rebuilding from this, it's going to take everything. Years of hard work with no guarantee it'll pay off. You deserve better than—" "I deserve to make my own choices." Clara's shout echoed across the burned land. "I'm not some fragile thing that needs you to decide what's best for me. I'm a grown woman who knows exactly what she's choosing. I'm choosing you. I'm choosing this. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." Wade felt something break in his chest. Not painfully, but like a dam giving way. All the fear he'd been holding back came flooding out in words he'd never meant to say. "What if I can't do it? What if I can't rebuild this place, can't give you the life you deserve? What if I fail and you regret staying? Then we'll fail together." Clara's voice softened but remained firm. "Wade, I didn't fall in love with your ranch or your money or what you could provide. I fell in love with you, the stubborn man who worked himself half to death rather than admit he needed help. The one who gave me his mother's music box because he couldn't say with words what he felt. You think I'm going to walk away because the barn burned down? It's more than the barn. I know it's more than the barn. It's your pride. It's your fear. It's every wall you ever built to keep from getting hurt again." Clara moved closer, taking his face in her hands like she had before, making him look at her. "But I'm not Rebecca. I'm not Thomas Garrett. I don't make promises I don't intend to keep. When I said I love you, I meant it. When I said I'm staying, I meant that too." Wade's throat closed up tight. He wanted to believe her, wanted it so badly it physically hurt. But a lifetime of loss had taught him that wanting something didn't make it safe to reach for. "I'm not good at this," he said roughly. "At trusting. At believing things can actually work out. I know. But you're going to have to try anyway, because I'm not going anywhere, and you're going to have to get used to that." Clara's thumb brushed ash off his cheek. "We fought a wildfire together, Wade. You really think a little debt and hard work is going to break us? Despite everything, the exhaustion, the fear, the overwhelming scope of what they'd lost, Wade felt a smile tug at his mouth. When you put it that way. Exactly. So stop trying to martyr yourself and let me help. We're partners, remember? Actually partners now. That means we figure this out together. Wade pulled her close, burying his face in her smoke-scented hair. I don't deserve you. Probably not. Lucky for you, I don't care about what you deserve. I care about what we are. Clara's arms came around him, holding tight. Now stop being an idiot and let's figure out how to save our ranch. Our ranch. Not his ranch. Not the place he'd built alone and nearly lost. Ours. The words settled into Wade's chest like a weight and a relief all at once. Okay, he said. Together. They pulled apart enough to look at each other, two exhausted, ash-covered people who'd just survived disaster and were about to face the hard work of rebuilding. Clara's eyes were red-rimmed but determined. Wade imagined he looked about the same. First thing, Clara said, shifting into practical mode, we need shelter for the horses and cattle before nightfall. What can we salvage from the barn? They spent the next hours sorting through the wreckage, finding what could be saved and clearing what couldn't. Cole showed up around midday with Dutch Peterson and Tom Bradford in tow, all three taking in the damage with grim faces. Saw the smoke from town, Cole said, gripping Wade's shoulder. Whole valley saw it. Came as soon as we could. How bad? Dutch asked, ever blunt. Bad enough. Wade gestured at the destruction. Lost the barn, most of the fencing, a lot of equipment. We saved the house and the livestock, but rebuilding is going to be... We'll help, Tom interrupted. Whole town will help if you let them. Wade started to protest, to say he didn't need charity, that he could handle it himself, but Clara's hand found his back, a gentle pressure that reminded him of what they'd just agreed. Together. Not alone. We'd appreciate that, Wade said instead, and felt something in his pride finally give way to something better. Thank you. The men set to work building a temporary shelter for the animals, while Clara went to salvage what she could from the house. Wade found himself working alongside his brother, both of them silent for a while before Cole spoke. She stayed, Cole observed. Yeah. Through a wildfire, to save your ranch. Our ranch, Wade corrected. And yeah. Cole smiled, driving a nail home with 3 solid strikes. You finally told her, didn't you, about how you feel? Took a disaster to get me there, but yeah. Better late than never. Cole paused, studying Wade. You good? Really good, I mean. Not just putting on a front. Wade thought about it, really thought about it. A day ago, losing this much would have destroyed him, would have confirmed every fear he had about building something that could be taken away. But standing here with his brother, with Clara inside the house, with neighbors coming to help, it didn't feel like destruction. It felt like something he couldn't quite name yet. I'm terrified, Wade admitted. Don't know if we can rebuild from this. Don't know if I'm enough to give Clara the life she deserves. But for the first time since Rebecca left, I'm not facing it alone. So yeah, I think I'm good. Cole's smile widened. That woman's the best thing that ever happened to you. Don't I know it? They worked until dark, accomplishing more with help than Wade could have managed in a week alone. A rough shelter stood where the barn had been. Not pretty, but functional. The livestock were safe and fed. Clara had cleaned the house enough to be livable and prepared a meal from what had survived the fire. When the neighbors finally left with promises to return tomorrow, Wade and Clara stood on their damaged porch watching the sun set over scorched land. We're going to make it, Clara said. Not a question, a statement. Wade wanted to list all the reasons they might not: the debt, the work, the uncertainty of weather and market prices, and 100 other variables they couldn't control, but instead he just nodded. Yeah, we are. The next weeks were brutal. Wade sold half the herd to raise cash, each animal loaded onto wagons feeling like a piece of himself leaving. He took on debt from the bank in Denver, signing papers that committed him to payments he wasn't sure he could make. Clara worked dawn to dark, running the household while also helping with the heavy labor of rebuilding. The town showed up in waves, men to help rebuild the barn, women bringing food and supplies, even old Dutch Peterson contributing lumber from his own property. Wade had spent years keeping people at arm's length, convinced that independence was the same as strength. Now he was learning the hard way that sometimes strength meant accepting help. You know what the difference is? Clara asked one night as they lay exhausted in bed, too tired to do anything but talk. Between you and Rebecca? Wade's stomach clenched at the name. He still didn't like thinking about her, about that humiliation. What? She wanted the fantasy of ranch life, the romance of it. But when faced with the reality, the hard work, the isolation, the constant struggle, she ran. Clara turned to face him in the darkness. I knew what I was getting into. Maybe not the specifics, but I knew it would be hard. And I chose it anyway. I chose you anyway. Even now? After all this? Especially now. You know why? She found his hand under the blankets, laced their fingers together. Because now I've seen what you're made of. Seen you fight for this place, for us, without giving up. That's worth more than a barn or a perfect garden or anything else we lost. Wade pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of her. I love you, in case I don't say it enough. You don't, but I know anyway. He could hear the smile in her voice. I love you too. Even when you're stubborn and scared and trying to push me away for my own good, I'll try to do that less. That's all I ask. They fell asleep tangled together, worn down to nothing but still somehow stronger than they'd been before the fire, because they'd survived it. Not just the flames, but the fear that came after. The fear of loss, of failure, of being vulnerable enough to actually need each other. By mid-May, a new barn stood where the old one had burned. It was smaller, simpler, built from salvaged materials and neighbors' donations. But it was solid. It would last. The fences were repaired, the cattle settled into new pastures already showing green growth. Clara had replanted her garden, smaller this time, but thriving. The ranch looked different than it had before. Scarred, changed, rebuilt from necessity rather than design. But it was theirs. Truly theirs, in a way it had never been when Wade was alone. One evening in late May, they sat on the repaired porch watching the sunset. Clara had been quiet all day, thoughtful in a way that made Wade wonder if something was wrong. You all right? He asked. Clara didn't answer right away. Then she took his hand, placed it on her stomach, and looked at him with an expression Wade couldn't read. I'm pregnant. The world stopped. Wade stared at her, trying to process the words, failing to make them mean anything. You're... what? Pregnant. About 2 months, I think. I wasn't sure at first, but now... She watched his face anxiously. Say something, Wade. He couldn't. His mind had gone completely blank, overwhelmed by the enormity of what she'd just said. A child. Their child. Something he'd never let himself imagine because imagining it felt like tempting fate. Wade, please, you're scaring me. That broke through. Wade focused on Claire's face, saw the worry there, the fear that maybe he didn't want this. He found his voice. You're pregnant. Yes. We're having a baby. Yes. Claire's voice wavered slightly. Is that... Are you... Wade kissed her, pulled her into his lap and kissed her like the world was ending and beginning all at once. When they broke apart, Clara was laughing and crying simultaneously. I'll take that as a yes, she managed. Yes. Yes, it's... Wade couldn't find words big enough. Clara, I never thought... I didn't let myself think... I know. Me either. But here we are. She touched his face gently. We're going to be parents. You're going to be a father. The weight of that hit Wade like a physical thing. A father. He'd be responsible for another life, another person who would depend on him completely. His own father had been bitter and broken, had taught Wade more about what not to do than what to do. Could Wade be better? Could he give his child what he'd never had? What if I'm terrible at it? The fear came out raw and honest. What if I don't know how? Then you'll learn. Same way we learned everything else. Claire's hands covered his where they rested on her stomach. We'll figure it out together. We'll make mistakes and fix them and do our best. That's all anyone can do. Wade thought about the ranch they'd rebuilt from ashes, about the marriage they'd started as a business deal and transformed into something real, about every hard thing they'd faced and survived because they refused to give up. Together, he repeated, together. They sat there as the sun painted the sky in colors that matched the fire they'd survived, orange and gold and red. But this time, the colors meant renewal instead of destruction. A beginning instead of an ending. Wade Mercer had stood at an altar once, alone and abandoned, and sworn he'd never risk his heart again. Now he sat with his wife, their child growing inside her, on land they'd fought for and saved together, and realized he'd been wrong about everything. Love wasn't weakness, vulnerability wasn't foolish, and the risk of loss was worth taking if it meant having something real to lose. "What do you think?" Clara asked softly. "Boy or girl?" "Don't care, long as they're healthy." Liar. You totally have a preference. Wade smiled despite himself. "Maybe a girl, with your determination and sense." "And your stubbornness and work ethic?" Clara laughed. "Poor child won't stand a chance. She'll be perfect." "Or he will be." "Or he will be," Wade agreed. They fell into comfortable silence, Clara's head on Wade's shoulder, his hand still resting on the small swell of her stomach where their future was growing. The ranch spread out before them, damaged but healing, smaller but stronger, different than it had been but better for it. Just like them. Cole visited the next morning and Wade told him the news. His brother's whoop of joy probably carried all the way to town. "I'm going to be an uncle!" Cole grabbed Wade in a rough hug, laughing. "I'll be the fun one. You'll be the strict one. Clara will be the one actually keeping the kid alive." "Sounds about right," Clara agreed from the doorway. Cole turned to her, suddenly serious. "You know what this means, right? You're stuck with us now, forever. Can't get rid of the Mercers once there's a baby involved." "Good thing I wasn't planning on going anywhere." They celebrated with coffee and the biscuits Clara had made that morning. Cole asked 100 questions about due dates and names and whether they'd add onto the house. Wade found himself actually engaged in the conversation instead of his usual terse responses, caught up in planning for a future that felt real and possible instead of dangerous. After Cole left, Clara cornered Wade in the barn where he was checking on a mare due to foal soon. "Can I ask you something?" "Always? What changed between when I first arrived and now?" Clara leaned against the stall door, genuinely curious. "You were so determined to keep distance, so sure that feelings were just risk with no reward. What made you stop fighting it?" Wade considered the question while he checked the mare's legs for swelling. "Honestly? The fire. When I thought I might lose you, not because you chose to leave, but because of something random and violent I couldn't control, it made me realize I'd already lost the safety I was trying to protect. You were already under my skin. I already cared. The only question was whether I'd admit it or waste what time we had pretending I didn't. So facing death made you braver. Facing death made me honest." Wade straightened, meeting her eyes. "Made me see that the pain of losing you would be the same whether I loved you openly or secretly. Might as well have the good parts too." Clara smiled softly. "That's possibly the most romantic thing you've ever said to me." "Don't get used to it. I'm still terrible with words." "You do fine when it matters." She crossed to him, stood on her toes to kiss him gently. The mare snorted behind them, impatient, and they broke apart laughing. "We should name the baby after a horse," Clara suggested, not seriously. "Something strong. Thunderbolt or Wildfire or—" "Absolutely not. Comet? Storm? Clara." "What about Lightning? That's a good name." Wade pulled her close, shaking his head but smiling. "We are not naming our child after a horse." "Fine. But I'm picking the middle name." "Deal." They stood in the barn, surrounded by the familiar smells of hay and horse, planning a future that Wade had never thought he'd be brave enough to want. The mare shifted in her stall, heavy with her own approaching birth, and Wade thought about cycles, about death and renewal, loss and rebuilding, fear and the courage to move past it. The ranch had burned. His heart had broken. He'd rebuilt both. And now, against all odds and his own best efforts to prevent it, Wade Mercer was happy. Not perfectly happy. There were still debts to pay, work to do, 1,000 uncertainties ahead. But happy in the way that mattered. Happy in a life built on honesty instead of fantasy. Happy with a woman who'd chosen to stay when staying got hard. Happy with a child coming who would never doubt whether they were wanted. It was terrifying. It was real. It was everything Wade had spent years running from, and he wouldn't trade it for all the safety in the world. Summer arrived with heat that baked the scorched earth and brought the first real test of what they'd rebuilt. The new grass came in patchy where the fire had burned hottest, and Wade spent long days moving cattle to areas with better grazing. The smaller herd meant less income, but also less work, which was good because Clara was starting to show, and Wade found himself watching her with a protectiveness that bordered on ridiculous. "I'm pregnant, not dying," Clara said one morning when Wade tried to stop her from carrying a basket of laundry. "I can still work." "I know that." "Then stop hovering." "I'm not hovering." Clara gave him a look that said she knew exactly what he was doing. "Wade, I appreciate the concern, but if you keep treating me like I'm made of glass, I'm going to start breaking things just to prove a point." Wade backed off, hands raised in surrender. "Fine. Carry your own laundry." "Thank you." But he still watched her from the corner of his eye as she hung clothes on the line, still found excuses to be nearby in case she needed help she wouldn't ask for. Cole ribbed him mercilessly about it when he visited. "You know women have been having babies since the beginning of time, right?" Cole said, grinning. "Claire's not the first." "I know that." "Could have fooled me. You're worse than a mother hen." Wade scowled. "If you're just here to give me grief, you can leave. I'm here to help with the fence repair you've been putting off." "The grief is just a bonus." Cole's expression turned more serious. "How are you really doing with all of it?" Wade looked out at the ranch, the new barn that still smelled of fresh wood, the repaired fences, the recovering land. 6 months ago, he'd thought losing this place would destroy him. Now he understood that places were just places. What mattered was who you shared them with. "Better than I expected," Wade admitted. "Scared, but in a different way than before." "Scared of what?" "Being a father, messing it up, not being enough." Cole nodded slowly. "You remember what Pa was like, especially after Ma died." "I remember." Hard not to remember a man who'd turned his grief into bitterness and taken it out on everything around him. "You're not him, Wade. You know that, right?" "I know I don't want to be him. That's not the same as knowing I won't be." "It's a start, though." Cole clapped him on the shoulder. "And you've got Clara. She won't let you turn into a bitter old bastard." "True enough." They worked on the fence in companionable silence, the kind that came from years of knowing each other. Wade had spent so long trying to do everything alone that having help still felt strange. But he was learning that accepting support wasn't weakness, learning that letting people in didn't automatically mean they'd hurt you, learning, slowly and imperfectly, to trust. Claire's pregnancy progressed through summer into fall. Her belly grew round and pronounced, and Wade caught himself just staring sometimes, amazed that there was a whole person in there, half him and half Clara, getting ready to join the world. "What are you looking at?" Clara asked one evening, catching him watching her read by lamplight. "You." "I can see that. Why?" Wade struggled to put it into words. "Just thinking about how different everything is from a year ago. How different I am." Clara set down her book, giving him her full attention. "How so?" "Year ago, I was alone, convinced that was safer, convinced I'd never let anyone close enough to hurt me again." Wade paused, choosing his words carefully. "Now I'm married to someone I actually love, about to be a father, living in a rebuilt house on rebuilt land with rebuilt everything, including myself. And I'm terrified, but I'm also happy," Clara supplied softly. "Yeah, happy. Didn't think I'd get to be that again." Clara's eyes went bright with unshed tears. Pregnancy had made her more emotional, though she'd stab anyone who pointed it out. "Come here." Wade moved to sit beside her on the sofa. Clara took his hand and placed it on her belly, where Wade felt a solid thump against his palm. He jerked back, startled. "Was that the baby kicking?" Clara laughed at his expression. "Getting stronger every day? Want to feel again?" Wade put his hand back, gentler this time, and felt another kick, then another. His child, alive and active, already making their presence known. Something fierce and protective swelled in his chest, a feeling so intense it almost hurt. "That's our kid, he said, voice rough with emotion. "That's our kid," Clara confirmed, "already stubborn like their father. Or determined like their mother. Same thing, really." They sat there as the baby moved under Wade's hand, both of them quiet and awed by the reality of what was coming. In a few months, they'd be parents, responsible for another life. It should have been more terrifying than it was. Instead, Wade felt oddly calm, like this was exactly where he was supposed to be. "We're going to be all right," Clara said, reading his thoughts like she often did now. All three of us. We'll figure it out. I know. And the surprising thing was, Wade actually believed it. October brought cooler weather and the start of preparations for another winter. This one didn't fill Wade with the same dread as previous years. They had enough hay put by, enough firewood stacked, enough supplies to last. The herd was smaller but healthier. The ranch was smaller but more manageable. And they weren't alone. Clara's due date was set for late November, and as the time grew closer, Wade found himself getting increasingly nervous. He'd delivered calves and foals, had helped with animal births more times than he could count. But this was different. This was Clara. This was their child. What if something goes wrong? He asked one night, unable to sleep. Clara rolled over to face him, awkward with her belly. Then we'll deal with it. The doctor knows when I'm due. We're prepared. Worrying won't change anything. I know that. Doesn't stop me from doing it. Welcome to parenthood. I'm told the worrying never stops. Clara's hand found his in the darkness. But Wade, we've survived everything else. Fire, debt, your emotional walls, my stubborn pride. We'll survive this too. What if I'm not ready? Nobody's ever ready. You just do it anyway. She squeezed his hand. Besides, you've already proven you're braver than you think. You chose to love me even when you were terrified of it. Compared to that, changing diapers will be easy. Wade huffed a laugh despite his anxiety. I doubt that. Maybe not easy, but manageable. Together, remember? Together. Clara fell asleep shortly after, but Wade stayed awake, listening to her breathe, feeling the occasional movement of the baby through the blankets between them. He thought about his own father, about the man he'd been before grief twisted him into something else. Before his mother died, Wade's father had been different, softer, kinder, someone who laughed and played and showed affection. Wade had seen what loss could do to a person, how it could hollow them out, turn them bitter and hard. For years he'd been terrified of becoming that, terrified that if he loved and lost, he'd end up the same way. But lying there in the dark with Clara beside him, and their child on the way, Wade finally understood the difference. His father had let loss define him, had chosen bitterness over healing. Wade was choosing differently. Choosing to keep loving even when it was scary. Choosing to build something new from the ashes instead of sitting in the ruins. It wasn't about not feeling the fear. It was about feeling it and moving forward anyway. The first snow came in early November, light dustings that melted by afternoon. Clara's movements had slowed as the baby grew, and she'd finally, reluctantly, agreed to let Wade handle more of the household work. He was terrible at it, burning dinner more often than not, but he tried. This is inedible, Clara said one evening, poking at the charred remains of what was supposed to be stew. I followed your instructions. You clearly didn't. But she was smiling, affection overriding annoyance. Come on, I'll show you again, properly this time. They cooked together, Clara directing while Wade did the actual work. It was domestic in a way that would have made him uncomfortable a year ago. Too soft, too vulnerable, too much like something that could be taken away. Now it just felt right. When I first got here, Clara said as Wade chopped vegetables under her supervision, I thought this arrangement would be simple, practical. I'd keep house, you'd run the ranch, we'd coexist without complications. We were both naive. Spectacularly naive, Clara laughed. I told myself I didn't want love, that I'd learned my lesson with Thomas, that a business arrangement was safer. What changed your mind? You did. Slowly. You were so determined to keep me at arm's length, but you kept showing who you really were anyway. The man who gave me his mother's music box, who caught me when I fainted, who looked absolutely terrified when I told him I was pregnant, but also more happy than I'd ever seen him. Clara paused, watching Wade work. You're a good man, Wade Mercer, even when you try hard not to be. Wade's hand stilled on the knife. I'm trying to be better, for you, for the baby. I know, and you are. But Wade, you were already good enough. You just couldn't see it. The words settled into Wade's chest, warm and unfamiliar. He'd spent so long believing he was fundamentally flawed, too cold, too damaged, too much like his father's worst parts, that hearing Clara say otherwise felt like a gift he didn't deserve. I love you, he said, because those were the only words big enough. I love you too. Now finish those carrots before the stew is completely ruined. They ate dinner together as snow fell outside, soft and quiet. The house was warm, the food was edible, and Clara was there across the table, belly round with their future. Wade tried to memorize the moment, the lamplight on Clara's face, the taste of stew that didn't burn, the contentment that came from simple things done with people you loved, because he'd learned the hard way that moments like this were precious, that they could be taken away in a fire, or a betrayal, or any of 100 other ways. But that didn't mean you shouldn't have them. It just meant you should appreciate them while they lasted. 3 weeks before Clara's due date, Dutch Peterson rode up in the middle of a snowstorm with news that the doctor was snowed in at the high pass and wouldn't make it down to the valley for at least a week. "There's a midwife in town," Dutch said, snow crusting his beard. "Mrs. Kowalski. She's delivered half the babies in Silverado Creek. I can fetch her if needed." Wade looked at Clara, who was trying to hide her own concern. "We'll be fine," she said. "Baby's not due for weeks yet. Plenty of time for the pass to clear." But 2 days later, Clara woke Wade in the middle of the night, hand tight on his arm. "Wade." He was instantly awake. What's wrong?" "The baby. I think—" She gasped, hand going to her belly. "I think it's coming." Wade's mind went blank with panic. Too early. The baby was coming too early. The doctor was gone and Wade had no idea what to do. He was on his feet, pulling on clothes, barely coherent. "I'll get Mrs. Kowalski. I'll ride to town right now." "Wade," Clara's voice cut through his panic. "There's no time. You're going to have to help me." "I can't. Clara, I don't know how to—" "You've delivered calves, foals. This isn't that different." "This is completely different. This is you. This is our baby." Clara grabbed his hand, squeezing hard as another contraction hit. When it passed, she looked at him with fierce determination. "Wade Mercer, you listen to me. I need you to be calm. I need you to be present. Can you do that?" Wade's hands were shaking, his heart racing, but he looked at Clara, strong, brave Clara, who'd stayed through fire and hardship and his worst fears, and found something solid to stand on. "Yeah," he said, "I can do that." The next hours were the longest of Wade's life. He did what Clara told him to do, bringing water and towels, helping her through contractions, trying to remember everything he'd ever seen in animal births, and praying it translated to humans. Clara was incredible, focused and determined even through obvious pain, directing Wade when he faltered, never losing her composure even when Wade could see she was scared too. "You're doing great," he told her, gripping her hand as she bore down through another contraction. "Don't lie to me." "I'm not lying. You're the strongest person I know. Flattery won't—" She gasped, cutting off mid-sentence. "Wade, something's happening." He moved to check, heart in his throat, and saw the crown of the baby's head. "I can see it. Clara, I can see the baby." "Then catch it," Clara gritted out and pushed. Everything happened fast after that. The baby emerged into Wade's shaking hands, tiny and red and screaming with impressive volume. Wade stared at the child he was holding, too overwhelmed to process what he was seeing. "Is it all right?" Clara's voice was urgent, exhausted. "Wade, is the baby all right?" "It's—" Wade's voice cracked. "She's perfect. Clara, we have a daughter." He cleaned the baby as best he could remember, wrapped her in the blankets Clara had prepared, and placed their daughter in Clara's waiting arms. Clara looked down at the tiny face, tears streaming down her own, and Wade felt something in his chest expand beyond anything he'd thought possible. "Hi, little one," Clara whispered. "We've been waiting for you." The baby, their daughter, had stopped crying and was looking around with unfocused eyes, tiny fists waving. Wade sat beside Clara on the bed, one arm around his wife, the other hand gently touching their daughter's impossibly small fingers. "We did it," Clara said softly. "You did it. I just tried not to pass out." Clara laughed weakly. "You did more than that. You were perfect. I was terrified. So was I. But we did it anyway." She looked up at him, exhausted but radiant. "What should we name her?" Wade studied his daughter's face. Clara's nose, his chin, a perfect combination of both of them. He thought about his mother, who died too young, about Clara's parents, who she still missed, about building something new while honoring what came before. "What was your mother's name?" he asked. "Elizabeth. But everyone called her Eliza. Eliza Mercer." Wade tried it out, liking how it sounded. "What do you think?" "I think it's perfect." Clara kissed their daughter's forehead. "Welcome to the world, Eliza." They sat together as dawn broke, exhausted and awed, and completely transformed. Wade had thought he understood love when he married Clara, thought he understood it when the fire forced him to admit his feelings. But this was different, bigger, more consuming, a love that came with bone-deep terror and fierce protectiveness, and an immediate willingness to do anything, sacrifice anything, for this tiny person who'd been in the world less than an hour. "I'm going to mess this up," Wade said quietly. "Being a father. I'm going to make mistakes. We both will. But Wade, look at her." Clara shifted so he could see Eliza better. "She doesn't need perfect parents. She just needs us, doing our best, loving her. That's enough." Wade hoped she was right, hoped that love and effort could overcome his lack of experience, his fears, his memories of what a father shouldn't be. He looked at Clara, who'd trusted him to help bring their daughter into the world, who'd trusted him with her heart, even when he'd given her every reason not to. If Clara believed he could do this, maybe he could. "I'm going to try," he said, "to be better than my father was, to give her what I didn't have." "I know you will. You already are." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, careful of the baby in her arms. "You know what I think? I think you've been preparing for this longer than you realize. Every time you chose to stay when you wanted to run, every time you let me in even though it scared you, every time you rebuilt instead of giving up, you've been learning how to be the man she needs." Wade kissed the top of Clara's head, then gently touched Eliza's cheek. His daughter, his family. Everything he'd thought he couldn't have, didn't deserve, was too damaged to keep. He'd been wrong about all of it. When Mrs. Kowalski finally arrived 3 days later, the storm having cleared enough for travel, she examined both Clara and the baby and pronounced them healthy. "You did well," she told Wade. "Both of you. First time I've heard of a rancher delivering his own child out of necessity. You should be proud." Wade was proud. Terrified still, exhausted from 3 nights of barely sleeping while watching over his wife and daughter, but proud. He'd done something he didn't think he could do. They both had. Cole visited as soon as the roads were passable, bringing gifts and excitement and so many questions that Clara finally kicked him out so she could rest. "She's beautiful," Cole said to Wade once they were outside. "Looks just like Clara, thank heavens. Wouldn't wish your ugly mug on any child." "Shut up," Wade said, but without heat. "You did good, brother. Really good." Cole's expression turned serious. "I'm proud of you. Not just for this, but for everything. The man you've become this past year." Wade felt uncomfortable with the praise, but accepted it anyway. Couldn't have done it without Clara. Maybe. But you had to let her help. Had to choose to change instead of staying stuck in your fear. That was all you. Cole clapped him on the shoulder. "Pa would be proud too. The good parts of him anyway, the parts he was before he let grief eat him alive." "I hope so." They stood in the cold November air, breath-forming clouds, looking at the ranch that had burned and been rebuilt. It wasn't the same as it had been before the fire, would never be exactly the same, but it was better in ways that mattered more than appearance, just like Wade himself. December brought serious cold and the challenges of new parenthood. Eliza had healthy lungs and used them frequently, especially at 3 in the morning. Wade and Clara took turns walking her, rocking her, trying every trick Mrs. Kowalski had suggested to get her to sleep. "This is harder than fighting a wildfire," Wade said one particularly brutal night, bouncing Eliza while Clara dozed fitfully on the sofa. "At least fires eventually go out," Clara mumbled. "Babies just keep going." But despite the exhaustion, despite the constant demands of caring for an infant, Wade had never been happier. He loved watching Eliza's expressions change, loved the way she gripped his finger with her tiny hand, loved coming inside from ranch work to find Clara nursing their daughter by the fire. He loved being a father, even the hard parts. Especially the hard parts, because they meant she was real. She was his. She was here. Christmas came quietly. They didn't have money for elaborate gifts, but Clara had sewn clothes for Eliza and Wade had carved a small wooden horse that their daughter was years away from appreciating. They ate a simple dinner and sat by the fire with Eliza between them, and it was perfect. "Last Christmas, we were still pretending," Clara said softly. "Still trying to convince ourselves this was just an arrangement. I wasn't very convincing. Neither was I." She smiled at him over Eliza's head. I'm glad we failed at it. Me too. They sat in the warm house while snow fell outside. A family now in every way that mattered. Wade thought about the path that had led here. The pain, the fear, the gradual opening of his heart despite every instinct telling him to keep it closed. It hadn't been easy. Nothing worth having ever was. But sitting there with his wife and daughter, in the house they'd saved together, on the land they'd rebuilt together, Wade finally understood what Clara had been trying to tell him all along. Safety wasn't the absence of risk. It was having someone worth risking everything for. January brought Wade's 34th birthday, which he would have ignored except Clara insisted on marking it. She made his favorite meal and presented him with a shirt she'd sewn from fabric she'd somehow acquired without him noticing. "You didn't have to do this," Wade said, genuinely touched. "I wanted to. Besides, all your shirts are falling apart. Again." Clara settled Eliza in her cradle, then came to sit beside Wade. "Can I ask you something?" "Always. Are you happy? Really, truly happy? Not just content or managing, but actually happy?" Wade considered the question seriously. Happy was a word he'd avoided for years, convinced it was too fragile to trust. But looking around at his life now, at Clara, at Eliza sleeping peacefully, at the home they'd built from the ruins of his old one, he couldn't call it anything else. "Yeah," he said, "I'm happy. Happier than I've ever been. Than I thought I could be." "Good." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. "Because you deserve it, Wade. You deserve all of it. I hope you're finally starting to believe that." He was. Slowly, imperfectly, he was starting to believe he wasn't just the sum of his damage and mistakes. That he could be a good husband, a good father, a good man. Not because he was perfect, he'd never be perfect, but because he kept trying, kept choosing love over fear, connection over isolation, hope over the safety of expecting nothing. "Thank you," Wade said quietly. "For what?" "For not giving up on me. For staying when I tried to push you away. For seeing something in me worth fighting for when I couldn't see it myself." Clara lifted her head to look at him, eyes bright. "Wade Mercer, you were always worth fighting for. You just needed someone stubborn enough to prove it. Lucky for me, I married the most stubborn woman in the territory." "Damn right you did." They kissed, gentle and sweet. And Wade felt gratitude so intense it almost hurt. Gratitude for second chances, for Clara's fierce determination, for the fire that had forced him to admit what he was too scared to say, for every hard thing that had brought him to this moment. February arrived with the first hints that winter might eventually end. The days grew fractionally longer, the cold slightly less bitter. Eliza was growing fast, already more alert, more responsive. She smiled now, real smiles that lit up her whole face, and Wade was embarrassingly devoted to earning those smiles as often as possible. "You're spoiling her," Clara observed one morning, watching Wade make ridiculous faces at their daughter. "She's 2 months old. I can't spoil her yet." "You absolutely can. And are. Don't care. Look at that smile. Worth it." Clara laughed, shaking her head. "You're a lost cause." "Your fault for making me a father." "Our fault," Clara corrected, coming to stand beside him. "And I regret nothing." They stood together, watching Eliza wave her tiny fists, and Wade marveled at how completely his life had transformed. A year and a half ago, he'd been alone and bitter, convinced that isolation was the same as strength. Now he was surrounded by love. Messy, complicated, terrifying love that required constant vulnerability and trust. And he wouldn't trade it for anything. March brought the anniversary of the fire, though the exact date was lost to Wade. He just knew it was around this time last year that flames had nearly taken everything. He and Clara walked the property one afternoon while Eliza napped in Mrs. Kowalski's care, examining how the land had recovered. New grass grew thick where the fire had burned, actually healthier than some areas that hadn't burned. The scars were still visible, scorched trees, altered landscape, but they were healing, becoming part of the land's story rather than its ending. "It's almost beautiful," Clara said, looking at the new growth. "In a strange way." "How so?" "The fire destroyed so much, but it also cleared away the dead wood, the overgrowth, made room for new things to grow, made the soil richer." She looked at Wade meaningfully. Sometimes destruction is necessary for renewal. Wade understood what she wasn't quite saying. The fire had destroyed the barn, the fences, the illusions they'd both been maintaining about their marriage being just an arrangement. But it had also cleared away Wade's defenses, his fears, the dead weight of his past that had been choking him, made room for something new to grow. "You're getting philosophical," Wade said. "Blame motherhood. Makes you think about metaphors." Clara slipped her hand into his. "But I mean it. I look at what we have now, at our family, our life, and I can't wish the fire hadn't happened, because I don't know if we'd have gotten here without it. We would have. Eventually. Maybe. But maybe we needed something big to force us past our fear. Both of us." Clara squeezed his hand. "Everything happens for a reason feels too simple. But I do think sometimes the hard things show us what really matters." Wade thought about that as they walked back to the house. About standing in the ashes thinking he'd lost everything, only to discover he'd gained what mattered most. About fear and risk and the courage it took to build something when you knew it could burn. Life on the frontier was harsh, unforgiving, full of ways to lose what you loved, but it was also full of possibility, full of second chances, full of proving that people were tougher than they thought, capable of more than they imagined. Wade had thought Rebecca's betrayal broke him. Turned out it had just been preparation, teaching him what he didn't want so he could recognize what he did when it arrived. April brought warmer weather and the anniversary of when Clara had arrived. They didn't celebrate it formally, but Wade noted the date. 1 year since a practical woman with sharp eyes and fierce determination had stepped off the train and agreed to marry a stranger for security. So much had changed since then. "Do you ever think about it?" Wade asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Eliza was in Clara's arms, content and drowsy. "What your life would be like if you'd stayed in Boston. If you'd never answered that mail-order advertisement. Sometimes, but it's hard to imagine now." Clara adjusted Eliza's blanket. "I'd probably still be sewing in some shop, living in a boarding house, alone and telling myself I was fine with it. What about you? Ever wish you'd picked a different bride? Someone easier, less stubborn?" "Never. You're exactly what I needed, even when I didn't know I needed it." Wade reached over to touch Eliza's soft hair. "Besides, an easier woman would have run when things got hard. Wouldn't have fought a fire with me or stayed through the rebuilding or delivered a baby with an incompetent rancher playing midwife." "You weren't incompetent. You were terrified but functional. There's a difference." "Barely," Clara laughed, the sound carrying across the quiet valley. "We did all right, didn't we? For two people who had no idea what they were doing." "Better than all right." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple. Eliza fell asleep in Clara's arms, and Wade felt that now familiar surge of love and protectiveness. His family, his home. Everything he'd built from the ashes of his old life. "Wade," Clara said softly, "I want to do something. I've been thinking about it for a while, but I wanted to ask you first." "What is it?" "I want us to renew our vows in the church, with our friends there. A real ceremony this time, not just a legal contract." Clara looked at him, uncertain. "The first time we married, it was business. We both know that, but now it's real. I want to stand in front of people and say the words meaning them, actually meaning them. Is that foolish?" Wade's throat tightened. He thought about that first ceremony, cold and empty, both of them armored against feeling anything. How different it would be now, with a year of history between them, with Eliza as proof of what they'd built. "It's not foolish," he said. "When?" "I was thinking summer. Give us time to plan, for the ranch to settle into the season. And," Clara hesitated, "I want to do it right this time. Want to wear something nice, have flowers, celebrate with people who care about us. Everything we didn't have before." "Then that's what we'll do." Clara's smile was bright and genuine, relief and excitement mixing. "Really?" "Really. You want a proper wedding? We'll have a proper wedding. Anything you want. I want you to mean the vows when you say them." "I'll mean them. Every word." Wade pulled Clara and Eliza closer. "I already do. This is just making it official." They spent the next weeks planning, fitting it between ranch work and caring for Eliza. Clara enlisted Sarah Bradford's help with a dress, and Cole insisted on being Wade's best man properly this time. The whole town got involved, excited about celebrating something good after a hard year. The ceremony was set for late June, the longest day of the year. Wade spent the morning nervous as a colt, checking and rechecking his appearance, until Cole physically removed him from his room. "You're already married to her," Cole pointed out. "This is just for show." "It's not just for show. It matters." "Then stop fidgeting and get to the church." The chapel was full when Wade arrived, nothing like the empty pews of his first 2 weddings. The whole town had turned out, and someone had decorated with wildflowers that reminded Wade of Clara's garden. He stood at the altar again, but this time without fear or dread. This time he knew she was coming, and she did. Clara walked down the aisle in a dress Sarah had helped her make, pale blue like the shutters she'd painted on the house. She carried Eliza, who was wearing a tiny white gown and looking around with wide eyes at all the people. Clara's eyes found Wade's, and her smile was everything. They stood together at the altar, the same altar where Wade had once waited alone, convinced he'd never risk his heart again. Reverend Matthews read from the same book, asked the same questions, but everything else was different. "Do you, Wade Mercer, take Clara as your wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live?" Last time, Wade had said, "I do," like signing a contract. This time, he looked at Clara holding their daughter and meant every word from the depths of his soul. "I do." "And do you, Clara Mercer, take Wade as your husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Clara said, voice clear and certain. They'd written their own vows for this ceremony. Wade had agonized over his, trying to find words big enough for what he felt. "Clara," he said, hand shaking slightly as he held hers. "When you arrived, I thought I was getting a housekeeper, a business partner, someone to help run the ranch without complicating my life. But you were never just those things. You were brave enough to stay when I tried to push you away, strong enough to fight beside me when disaster came, patient enough to wait for me to admit what I felt. You took a broken man and helped him rebuild himself, the same way we rebuilt this ranch together. You gave me Eliza, gave me a family, gave me a future I never thought I'd have. I promised to spend the rest of my life being worthy of that, being the man you saw in me even when I couldn't see it myself. I love you, more than I have words for." Clara's eyes were streaming, but she was smiling. "Wade, I came here looking for safety, a place to hide from hurt. You gave me that, but you also gave me so much more. You gave me a home, a purpose, a love I didn't think existed anymore. You showed me that taking risks is worth it when you find the right person to risk everything for. You're stubborn and scared and terrible at expressing feelings, but you're also loyal and brave and more capable of love than you'll ever admit. I promise to stay beside you through whatever comes next, through fires and fears and all the hard things life will throw at us, because there's nowhere else I'd rather be. I love you. Always have. Always will." They exchanged rings, not the plain bands from their first ceremony, but new ones that Cole had helped Wade pick out. Simple silver circles engraved with words only they would understand. "Together," Wade's read. "Always," said Clara's. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Matthews said, smiling. "Again, you may kiss your bride." Wade pulled Clara close, careful of Eliza between them, and kissed his wife while the church erupted in applause. It was messy and imperfect, and Eliza started crying from all the noise, but it was real. More real than anything Wade had ever experienced. The reception was held at the ranch, the same ranch that had burned and been rebuilt, now filled with neighbors and friends celebrating. There was music and dancing and more food than they knew what to do with. Cole gave a speech that was embarrassing and heartfelt in equal measure. Sarah Bradford cried happy tears. Even Dutch Peterson smiled, which was practically a miracle. Wade danced with Clara in the yard where they'd fought the fire, where everything had changed. Eliza was being passed around by various women, all of them cooing over her while she smiled her way through the attention. "Happy?" Clara asked, head on Wade's shoulder as they swayed to music someone was playing on a fiddle. "Terrified," Wade admitted. "Happy. Both at the same time. Welcome to life with me. It's never simple." "I wouldn't want simple anymore." They danced until sunset painted the sky in colors that reminded Wade of flames, but beautiful ones this time, full of light instead of destruction. The party continued into the evening, but eventually people started heading home, leaving Wade and Clara and Eliza alone in their house. Wade stood on the porch with his family, looking at the land that had tested him, broken him, and ultimately made him stronger. The ranch would never be perfect. There would be more hard times, drought or disease or disaster they couldn't predict. But he'd face them with Clara beside him, with Eliza to fight for, with a foundation built on honesty instead of fear. "What are you thinking?" Clara asked, coming to stand beside him with Eliza asleep against her shoulder. "About how wrong I was. About everything. About love being weakness. About safety meaning isolation. About thinking I could protect myself by not feeling. And now? Now I know that love is the only thing worth being vulnerable for. That real safety comes from having people who'll stand beside you when things fall apart. That feeling everything, the fear and the joy and the risk, is what makes life worth living." Wade put his arm around Clara, kissed Eliza's sleeping head. "I'm grateful it all went wrong. That Rebecca left. That the fire happened, because those things brought me here, to you, to this." Clara leaned into him, and they stood together as stars emerged overhead. The ranch spread out before them, imperfect, scarred, but theirs. A testament to rebuilding after destruction, to choosing courage over fear, to love that survived because it was built on honesty instead of illusion. Wade Mercer had stood alone at an altar twice, once abandoned, once before marrying a stranger for convenience. Tonight he'd stood there again, but this time surrounded by love, renewing vows that had transformed from contract to commitment. The journey between those moments had been brutal, full of loss and fear and having to face every wall he'd built around his heart. But it had also been worth it, because now Wade understood what his father never had. That grief didn't have to define you. That loss didn't have to make you bitter. That you could survive the worst things and still choose to love, to hope, to build something beautiful from the ashes. The frontier was harsh. It took as much as it gave, but it also offered something precious to those brave enough to risk everything. It offered the chance to start over, to become someone new, to prove that even damaged people could build lives worth living. Wade had taken that chance. So had Clara. Together, they'd created something neither could have managed alone. A family, a home, a love that would outlast any fire. And standing there under the stars with his wife and daughter, on the land they'd saved together, Wade finally felt something he'd thought he'd lost forever. He felt whole. Not perfect, not undamaged, but whole in the way that mattered, complete with all his scars, stronger for having broken and healed, grateful for every hard thing that had led him here. The man who'd once vowed never to risk his heart again had learned the most important lesson of all, that hearts were meant to be risked, that love without vulnerability was no love at all, that the only real failure was never trying. Wade Mercer had tried, had failed, had gotten up and tried again, and this time he'd won.